Randa is a very special Egyptologist. يعني I won't say so much about her يعني because يعني she's very well known, but she is the head of the Department of Egyptology in Mansoura University, where she is an integral part of the biogeometry community. She has يعني a foot in both dimensions, and she always picks very interesting topics for us. This time the topic is women in ancient Egypt. الرجالة خلاص. Women in ancient Egypt. I'm sure we will enjoy this lecture. Welcome, Dr. Baligh, please.
Thank you, Doc.
If you prefer to sit down, please feel free.
Fine, okay. Thanks very much. Welcome everyone to the lecture. My name is Dr. Randa Baligh. I'm a professor of Egyptology. I studied at AUC, but actually my degree was in political science. I actually did a complete different degree in Egyptology after I graduated from university, because I was so interested. But at that time, my parents did not feel it was, shall we say, important enough, or maybe something to just do in your free time. It was that sort of an attitude. But they figured you get a degree. And I actually worked, I worked for a while as a journalist in the Los Angeles Times, the Cairo Bureau, and the EBC News. And for a while I was a producer. I was working in political science and also publishing in an Arabic publication that it was called the Siyasa Dawliya, and Usama al-Ghazali. It was for a while. But I was so interested, I went in and got another degree and graduate studies after that. I studied at Brown for a year, and then at Yale I did the MPhil and PhD in Egyptology. So it's more of an interest also than anything else. Definitely in this lecture I will try to give facts. I hope that's okay with everyone, because it really gets on my nerves when sometimes I watch something in television and people just start saying things that are just not true, or we don't have evidence for them, but they speak about them like they are truths. They're not truths. But we will try to just talk about what we think is the reality of the situation. Okay, so the women in ancient Egypt. Basically, the advancement of societies is measured by the way that they treat women. Okay, so we want to see how women really were treated in ancient Egypt. There are certain things that we know already, and we do have facts for them that tell us quite a lot. For example, well, there was divorce, and that in itself is something. And they were allowed to remarry, and they usually did also. In many cases, we do have cases of marrying again. They were allowed to own property in their own names, apart from a husband or a father or any male relative, okay, or a husband, nothing. So that's really something. They were allowed to work and could support themselves and others if they had to. I mean, they worked in different professions. We'll see what types of things they could work at also. But the ancient Egyptian system was a patriarchal one. You know, in anthropology, there's the patriarchal societies and matriarchal societies. For example, in Nubia, because that's right in Egypt, they actually have sort of a matriarchal system. And in the Bible, for example, there is a character called in English, I think it's called Candice, because that became a name and it's now used. She was the Kandaka, or the Kandake. She was the sort of a tribal leader. And also in the families, the head of the family, up till today in the Kanuz and the Fadija, the head of the family is usually a woman. So there are societies that are definitely matriarchal, but the ancient Egypt was patriarchal. And we are one of the oldest societies that also had private property ownership. I mean, you could own stuff, you know, land and a house and all the different things. And we actually, because of the writing, we do have, you know, legal documents. We have contracts. And they had a very well-developed legal system. Just so you know, there were like 3 different types of courts. And the highest one was the Court of the 10. It was headed by Pharaoh himself. If for some reason you did not feel that you got justice, or you don't like the ruling of the first 2 courts, you had every right to appeal to the higher court. So that's also definitely something. Okay. Okay, let's see. Just check the time. Right. So we do have cases of female monarchs, actual rulers, not a queen consort. Okay? And they start as early as Dynasty 1. We have about 30-something dynasties. Okay? We have 30-something dynasties. And for them to start as early as Dynasty 1 is really something also. I remember reading in a very old book written by a British gentleman in the 1800s. Okay? They had discovered the tomb of this female pharaoh called Merit-Neith. Her name was written in, you know, the early on in the first 2 dynasties. The names of king were not written in the elongated cartouche. They actually were written in a rectangular shape called the serech. It is the entrance of the palace, they think, because it looks like it's the you know, front part of a building and it has 2 pillars. And then the name of the king would be up there in, you know. And so her name appeared there, and she had a really large tomb, a mastaba tomb. And it was in the area that they had the tombs of the first dynasty rulers in the area around el-Gaib in Abydos. Okay, Baliana, Soheg governorate. So anyway, he was saying something like, well, she had a large tomb and her name is placed like that of a pharaoh, but there is no way that a primitive society would have had a woman ruler, so maybe we are misreading the situation. That's basically what he said, okay? Right, but then we have another one. We have in Dynasty 4, Merit-Neith, we have Nitocris, Dynasty 12, okay? So we have them going on. Hatshepsut is probably the most well-known worldwide, and she was in Dynasty 18, okay? But we also have in Dynasty 19, Taosret, okay? And also there's Cleopatra the 7th, but of course that was it's different. That was the Ptolemaic rule. They still consider them sort of Dynasty 32, but it's still, they weren't like the pure or the regular Egyptians. But even in ancient Egypt, and these were all Egyptian queens with Egyptian names and families, and they were rulers. But I have to tell you, the position of Pharaoh was usually, well, the Pharaoh was supposed to be sort of the embodiment of the living Horus. The name is actually Hor, or Her even. It's not written with a very long U. It's Hor, okay? The S, of course, with Isis is Isa and Osiris is Osir. We don't have a Z sound at all in ancient Egypt, by the way. We have a P, but we don't have any kind of Z, Zel, Zod, Zir. Any Z of any kind does not exist in ancient Egyptian, just so we know, yeah. But anyway, so the king was supposed to be sort of the embodiment of the Lion King, basically the story of the Lion King, you know, the evil uncle who kills the father, and then when the son grows older, he becomes the rightful ruler and gets rid of the evil uncle. Anyway, so the position in itself was made sort of to be a male. But these ladies, every one of them, well, we're not sure about the first one though, Dynasty 1, but the others, we're pretty sure of their lineage and their genealogies, and they were from the royal family. So basically what happens is usually all of the males of the family are gone, and then there's only the female to take over, so she takes over, okay? So that's basically what happens. We also have some other situations. So, for example, there was a lady who was the mother of King Pepi II of the 6th dynasty. That's the old kingdom of Egypt. And when he became a ruler, he was very young. He was maybe less than 6 years old. And so she became the legal guardian for the throne. And she made for herself a very big pyramid complex. And it appears from all of her monuments that she was, well, the actual ruler, of course. And she was basically running the country. So we wouldn't put her up there. She didn't take the titles of kings, but she was very, very important as well. The other thing, and this is a character all of you will recognize, is Nefertiti. She was the wife of Akhenaten. Nefertiti, it is very highly probable, it's very well suspected, based on actual things that we discovered, that she might have ruled Egypt as an actual monarch also for a while towards the end of the reign. So there is no real concrete evidence, but for example, for a while they were suspecting that Semenech Kara, who came after Akhenaten as a king, and Nefertiti were the same person. Well, partly because they both shared the same epithet, Nefer, Neferu, Eaten, okay, beauty of beauties of Aton. So well, there's a lot of things, not just that, the fact that she lived in a separate palace also for a while in Amarna. There were lots of things basically, but again, we're not putting her as an official, we were not absolutely sure, but there's a lot of indicators. Also, I'm not sure if you've heard about the letters of Amarna. They were discovered in Tel El Amarna, or Amarna, where they had the capital of Akhenaten, the new capital city. And they are on clay tablets that were later, they're clay tablets, and they were written in cuneiform. Cuneiform it's like the Arabic alphabet in a sense. You know that the Arabic alphabet, you can have Arabic, for a while it was Turkish and Farsi and Hindi. These were all, also they used the Arabic alphabet for that. In cuneiform, it's also an alphabet, but different languages were written in it. I mean, you have some Akkadian, you have just different things, from Ugarit. So basically, it's not in ancient Egyptian language, our own language. But luckily, we have lots of experts, and they were translated. There were lots of correspondences from the Amarna letters written by the females. Apparently, Akhenaten and even for a while Amenhotep III, they allowed the women to correspond directly with the kings and princes of the Levant, Syria, Palestine, all of that area, Iraq, at that time, Iraq and Iran as well, Naharina and all of that. So they actually corresponded directly in their own names as well, and were apparently quite involved in politics, both internal and external. Okay. We have another situation, and I know that all of you know of, for example, Ahmose I. Is something wrong? No, I wanted this. I don't want the. First of all, it's this one. It's this one, this icon, but I don't want it like that. I actually do need to know. I mean, I will probably skip some things. So there was a reason I left this this side, if it's okay. Plus, well, for example, it doesn't have all the stuff that I'm planning on sharing. I'm just, this is the main outline, but we're talking about different things. So we're talking about Ahmose I, Ahmose who expelled the Hyksos rulers. We all know of him. Well, during the time of the war, we have Seqenen-Ra-Ta'a the first and the second, and Kamose, who was probably the brother of Ahmose. And even during the time of Ahmose, during all of that time, the females took a very active part in the rule. Okay? So there is plenty of evidence, okay? Like the ladies, Teti Sheri, the grandmother, and Hotep. بالمناسبة is the moon. Iyuha, Wahawi, Iyuha. The Nasheed. It's from the 12th dynasty, by the way. Okay, it was Uhoy, Iyah, the ancient one. Okay, from the festival of the moon when the crescent appears. It's a very old, now that we say it, we're not even sure. And if you listen, by the way, to the very old songs, you'll notice that it's Iyaha, not Iyuha. It's Iyaha. Okay? Very heavy, the Ain and the Ha together are really horrible together. Yeah, it's a bit heavy for such a lovely name, but still. So, the ladies were very active, and Ahmose Nefertari, she was the wife of Ahmose, and also she was the grandmother of Hatshepsut. I need you to make these correlations. The idea of the strong women, it runs in that family. Ahmose Nefertari, when her son died, Amenhotep I, the son of Ahmose, they were in a position where he did not have children. And so apparently they got a general from the army, a very well-known general in the army. And he was already married, and he had several older children. Okay? And she made him marry her daughter, Ahmose, in order to get the right to rule. Basically, if you want to be official, then okay. Have any of you seen Shrek? Shrek 1, anyway. Okay, you want to be a king, you need to marry a princess. That's exactly the situation. Exactly the situation. You have to have legitimacy by marrying a royal princess. Okay. So we have a situation where they discovered several stelae that were apparently sent throughout Egypt. And on top, that has a round top, and on top there is Ahmus Nefertari and her daughter, Queen Ahmus, and Thutmose I, Thutmose al-Awwal. And it says that he will be the king. So she's sort of giving her blessing, and everyone knows her, as we said, because the men of that family were fighting outside of Egypt for a long time, and the women were basically running the country. Okay? Hotep, the mother of Ahmus, for example, in her tomb, they discovered different daggers and things, including a military order of the three flies. It's an order of valor. Okay? So they were running the country. And also when Ahmus expelled the Hyksos, he's a Saidi. Okay? And he wanted to take revenge, basically. So it wasn't enough for him. He actually followed them to Sharuhin and stayed outside for 3 years. It was a very heavily walled city, and did not leave until he just ended it. He had to go in and... So, I mean, what do you think, was happening in those 3 years? And this is before the internet or telephone or any of these things. So basically, the females here have been running the country, and it's very obvious. Okay. So basically, we do have monarchs, and the ladies were active in rule. We have a lot of written also evidence to suggest that sort of thing. In addition to monuments, when you have very grand monuments, it's also a big indicator. Okay. But for example, in Dynasty 6, we have the case of the Lady Pesichet. And many of you may have heard of her before, because this is a sort of weird situation. And that's this is Old Kingdom. This is Old Kingdom. She's mentioned in the tomb of her son, not her own tomb. But she's given a lot of titles. She is called She of the Curtain. That basically means a vizier. Okay, and a judge. She's a judge, a female judge. That's not a small position. Judges, even then, were highly respected, and it's a very, very strong position. Okay, but she also had another position. She was chief physician, and it doesn't specify if they're female physicians or all physicians. She's just written as the chief physician. That's a huge honor as well. So this is a weird situation. We have lots of priestly positions for women. Lots of priestly positions. They were priestesses. And priestesses, it was a paid job, by the way, also in many cases, for men and for women. The economy, that leads us a bit to the economy of ancient Egypt. We still don't have the invention of money. Okay, we don't have the invention of money. It doesn't mean you don't have an economy. They were given land, okay, by the pharaoh, endowments, and they also got salaries, and that's why you had a lot of clerks and scribes, because they were given their pay in kind. They would get khars or big. You had a lot of weights and measures also for that. They got big sacks of grain, usually barley, from which they made the bread and sort of a beer-like drink for the entire family. Okay, and they also got linen. We still don't have cotton, just like now, basically. But they did not have cotton yet, not before King Muhammad Ali. They had linen, kitteen. They got actual large atweb, just a lot of cloths from which they could make their clothes. In the case of different types of workers. They also got, for example, metal instruments as part of their pay. They would give them that. So we do have an economic situation. There is an economy, and they were also paid. But in a lot of cases, they were the noble ladies or ladies of the royal house also that received the very high sort of priestly positions. Okay, and well, they didn't have to be priestesses of a goddess only, for example. They could be also priestesses of a male deity. I mean, it did go mostly for maybe for female deities, but it could also be for males. Okay. We have a number of female weavers that were mentioned by name, and a lot of them, we saw them actually doing this work. You probably all know of Nagada and Akhmim. They have a very old tradition of textiles, and they make them using the horizontal loom. It's very ancient Egyptian. They're usually household operated by the Copts. Usually the man and his wife, they operate the large horizontal loom. Now most of us have seen the vertical loom that they use, for example, in the area of Wisa Wasif, and where they do the rugs. You usually have the vertical ones, but those ones used in ancient Egypt were mostly the horizontal ones, and they still have them in Nagada and Akhmim, and they're usually in households. But also the weaving and making the actual thread, a lot of it was done by the women, by the spindles, the little spindles, and we have a lot of the spindles, by the way. They moved quite a number of them now to the Nemek, the National Museum for Egyptian Civilization. Okay, this just gives us an example of some of the women, okay, ending with Cleopatra the 7th, even though she is not per se an Egyptian. Okay, Berit Nit and Sobek Nefro, Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Taosret, and lastly Cleopatra. Okay. In order to talk about the female deities, let me just give a very basic idea of the religion, but I think you already know a lot of that stuff. The ancient Egyptian pantheon of gods and goddesses had humans and animals and insects, and also things such as the inundation, the Nile, all of the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, all of them had also, associations with deities. But I want to sort of concentrate now on the important female deities that we have. Like Isa or Isis. She is like the mother goddess, and she's not the oldest one. We had a cow goddess called Bat, one of the oldest deities, female deities that we have. She's shown on the Narmer palette. And later on, the now famous, or then she was famous goddess, the bovine goddess Hathor, became equated with Isis. So you often see Isis portrayed as a female, but wearing on her head a sun disk and the two horns of the cow. The old cows that we had all had horns. Okay. So Isis is very important. First of all, she was also important when Christianity entered Egypt, because they already associated the Egyptian with the idea of a virgin who had a child. Basically, Osiris was killed by his brother on the night of the wedding. And also he cut off the body, and dispersed it through the land, and she had to bring the body together and sprinkle it with holy water, and she brought him back to life just for a second in order to just, get one seed from which she had her son Horus. So the whole idea even of a holy virgin is very well known. And when Christianity came to Egypt, they actually took entire statues of Isis suckling Horus or with her child or whatever, and just placed it in the sanctuary in the old churches, which were also, many of them were in temples. Incidentally, almost all of the ancient Egyptian temples that we know had churches. Luxor temple had about 6, but sometimes they considered just a niche or a baptism, which was done, one of those baptism basins, which was carved in the capital of a column. They consider that evidence of a church in that region. Okay. Incidentally, all the ancient Egyptian temples also have days where the sun is it enters the sanctuary directly. The very famous one is Abu Simbel. It's not the only one. Almost all of them have them, including Karnak temple, by the way, including the one in near the Sphinx in Giza. Okay, Dandara. Almost all of the temples actually have. I was supervising a thesis, and we sort of went through and took them in turn, and almost all of them have cases where the sun enters the sanctuary on specific dates. I mean, that's the genius of the ancient Egyptian architects, that they would be in a certain position, but so that on the festival dates and in certain times, then you would have this sun coming right into the sanctuary. You have it also in Qasr Qarun in Fayoum, even though it's from the Ptolemaic period, even from the Roman period, I think. Anyway, so just so you know, the protective goddesses or the protectresses of the king, they're all female. That should tell you something. Not one single male in there. Okay, they're all, every one of them is female. Okay, there were 4 of them. Isis and Iftis, these were basically women. And Serket, she was Serket, or Serket is the scorpion goddess, and Neet, the goddess Neet of Sais in the Garbeya governorate, the western part of Egypt, or the delta. Okay, and you also have the 2 really important ones, okay, Wadjit and Nechbet. Okay, these were really, really well-known ones. Okay. Cleopatra VII used to dress as the living Isis, by the way. Okay, why is it not following? I'm moving it here and it's not moving up there. Not sure why. دي المفروض اللي تظهر دلوقتي، ليه مش هي اللي بتظهر؟ Well, okay, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Mosque of Tutankhamun. It's one of the most famous pieces of antiquities in all of Egypt. Have you ever noticed the vulture and the cobra about to prance right there at the forehead? Yeah. The Wadjit is the cobra, the Egyptian cobra goddess, and Nechbet is الحداية الحداية اللي هي شبه انقرضت. My parents used to say that they used to see them in school and they used to tell them be careful. And my dad remembers having a sandwich in his hand and it just came down and got it from his hand. So they're you know, they're like eagles and things. I mean, هي طير جارح يعني definitely. You mean the kite? The kite. Well, the kite. There's a lot of talk about that particular one. They have them still in a few areas, but they were much more common even when my parents were growing up, obviously. And we even have the expression بتاعت الحداية اللي هي بتحدف كتاكيت ولا مش فاهم ايه. They're both very vicious, obviously, creatures, and maybe that's why they figured they'd use the viciousness to protect the king. Okay. So it's basically no longer connected with this. Well, is there a way to move the to just we could try to just remember that movie, The Skyscraper. Basically, it worked in the end with the way that you used to fix her mobile when something went wrong. You just turn it off and on again. And it did the trick for the entire building, you know. So anyway, moving on. So yes, we talked about the protective goddesses and that they were all female. But we wanted also to speak about marriage and divorce. Regarding marriage and divorce, we don't have actual written contracts before Dynasty 27, which is a bit late in the civilization. It does not mean that marriage did not exist, because we have, as early as the Old Kingdom, you've seen, of course, Nehbet and Wajid, beautiful on the mosque itself. Okay. بالضبط. This is a very important one I want to talk about, but also moving on to incidentally with childbirth, you know that the actual way that they use now in the US for ladies who go in and give their you know, they give birth there, is very similar. It's sort of in a seated position, sort of seated and leaning position, no longer completely horizontal. It makes better sense to be in this position to give birth, have gravity work with you, I guess. Okay, these are the childbirth deities. We also have quite a number of midwives. Okay, and it's very interesting to note them. For example, the Bible. In the Old Testament, when, you know, in the story of Moses, okay, we have actually two of them named by name, ancient Egyptian. They were midwives, because the Pharaoh, they asked them to alert them when a woman was about to give birth, so they knew they wanted to kill the children, because they had this prophecy that, you know, one of the children of Israel would be the end of the Pharaoh, so they were killing the children. But other than this story, we do have attested midwives, and quite early on in the civilization as well. Okay, I'll come back to the marriage and divorce, obviously, but the position of women through art, because that's also important. Instead of talking, let's just see the examples and you see for yourself, okay? In most of the cases, you'll notice that the female is shown proportionate to the king, okay? We do have a case here, the very first one on top, that's Ramses II. And it's in the first courtyard of Karnak temple. And you have this small female figurine which goes up to about his knee. Okay? Right, that's maybe one example here. That's one example, but you have to realize something. Ramses II was one of the very few pharaohs that we have that were actually deified as a god. What does that mean? It means that, unlike what people believe or think, not every pharaoh in ancient Egypt was deified. In order to be officially deified, it means that you have an actual figure inside a sanctuary and you have offerings presented in your name. Okay? How many do we have of that? We have maybe 4 or 5 in all of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Okay? Including Seti I, the father of Ramses II, is also deified in Abydos. He's one of the gods in the sanctuary. You have Ramses II, and he was deified, but mostly in Nubia. However, we do have a couple of statues for him in the courtyard of Luxor temple, and the writings indicate that offerings were presented in front of those 2 statues on certain times during each day. Okay, so Seti I, Ramses II, we have also Amenhotep I and Akhenaton. Akhenaton, actually, there's more than one piece of evidence that indicates, including a stela that mentions worshipping Akhenaton, not the Aton itself, but Akhenaton himself. So, but anyway, and Tutankhamun also in certain areas, but not many deified pharaohs as you would think. Okay? And incidentally, because there's been a lot of people giving what I consider misinformation and saying that the name of Pharaoh was a personal name. Yeah, right. We actually have it in all of the Abrahamic books, by the way, all of them, okay? And they go from the Old Kingdom, obviously the event with Abraham, it's not in the Quran, it's in the Bible, that Abraham and Sarah, they had a confrontation with Pharaoh at the time, okay? And they go through the Middle Kingdom, and during the time of Joseph when he was in Egypt. But yes, I have to tell you, the Bible here is different from the Quran. It's very weird. In the Quran, in the story of Joseph particularly, it never says Pharaoh, even though he uses it in different times, okay? But not in this case. It's always al-Malik. The story of Joseph, Surah Yusuf, was in one verse. كويس ونقول نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص. آخرها كده يعني في الآخر الجزء بتاع يوسف شخصيا يعني توفني مسلما وألحقني بالصالحين. In this entire one, he's talking about the king of Egypt, but in this case he never calls him Pharaoh. He just calls him al-Malik. نحن نفتقد صواع الملك always الملك, not Pharaoh. But in all of the other literature, okay, from the Abrahamic books, as I said, it's always I think it's فصل من هنا. We also have in the Old Kingdom as well as the very late period. For example, in the Bible it says specifically that Solomon, son of David, married a daughter of Pharaoh. They think that it might have been Sa'amun, dynasty 21, because of the timing, because he lived around 990 BC, okay? Also, Abraham, if you take the timing, he had to be during the Old Kingdom sometime or something, because he lived in the 3rd millennium BC, 3rd millennium. So anyway, so yes, it's used too many times, not just in the holy books. I'm giving the example of the holy books because I figured most of us would be aware of them at least. But I'm talking all kinds of literature. Obviously, the name was used from the very beginning of the civilization, the early time of the dynasties, and all throughout the Egyptian history. So basically, there is no way that it... and besides, the name itself has a meaning, very well attested meaning, that is still used. The per means house, and a means large or big, so it's basically the big house, it's the palace. We still say that how the White House did whatever or said whatever. Obviously, it's a house. They're talking about the American president. The White House announced today, blah, 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 you know? So it's something very well known that you could call, you know, we have even in Turkey, al-Bab al-Ali. Obviously, it was the Bab Bardo of the palace, okay? Okay, as I said, if you look, I need you to notice just a few things. First of all, it was one of those things in ancient Egyptian art. Ihab, you probably know this, you're an artist. You know that in ancient Egyptian art, the males are always shown with darker skin. Even if he's a prince and the woman is depicted as a farmer, because there were peasants, okay, and they used to work in the land, and we have several scenes of them working in the land, and it just became sort of a tradition. Or maybe they just still are like present-day Egyptian men. They prefer that the woman be nice and white. They prefer that. But they always show the women with lighter skin. And this is something that continued throughout the ancient Egyptian artistic tradition. Okay? And we have many of these cases. Okay, these are the triads of Mycerinus, Loa Menkaura, builder of the 3rd smaller pyramid in Giza. This is actually, I was so happy to find that one. It was at the time of the discovery. It was from the Valley Temple in Giza of Menkaura, and they actually think that there were 42 of these. I just want you to note the hierarchy that you see here. First of all, the king is always in the middle, and here is the idea. The king being in the middle, do you know that whenever there is a podium, whether it's a judge's podium or, for example, in the case of universities, when we are, example, we have a thesis defense, a PhD or a master's defense. The oldest and the one who is going to be the head of the committee sits in the middle. To his direct right is the second, okay? The least important one comes on the left at the very end, if there are like 4 or 5 or depending, okay? So we have here always the king will be in the middle, okay? On his right-hand side, there is always the goddess Hathor, okay? And in some cases, she is even shown larger than the others. We have other cases where the gnome deities, including male deities, are shown way smaller than her, okay? They believe that there were 42 of these. There are 3 now in Cairo. They were in the Tahrir Museum. I'm not sure where they are right now, okay? But we have pieces of another 2 or 3. And there are also a couple of them in Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts, the MFA, okay? But basically, it shows the hierarchy, and it also shows how important Hathor was. She's shown also the same size as the king. Okay. That's Menkaura with his wife. Also, notice how she's sort of holding him. She has a hand around the shoulders here. Okay. Amenhotep III and T, you see this when you go, as you go into the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, it's right ahead of you, those two huge statues. Interestingly enough, T and Nefertiti, one was the mother of Akhenaten, the second was his wife. They were both not from royal families, okay? And yet they became two of the most powerful women who got involved very much in politics. And as I said, in the letters of Ramarna, it shows how they directly wrote and corresponded with the rulers around the neighboring countries. Okay, in this case, Nefertari, we have her in some cases, and also his daughters, like Merit Amun. The daughters and wives of Ramses II are sometimes shown in smaller size because in that particular position they are deified. Okay, in this case, this is the small temple of Abu Simbel. There is the large one on the Egyptian pound, the 4 figures of Ramses II. And then the smaller temple, it's dedicated to Hathor. And here, Nefertari is shown as Hathor. So they're both deities at this, at this point. So they're, of course, both shown in the same size. But incidentally, even in her temple, I mean, she was a favorite, but he's still shown with double the number of statues for himself than for her. Okay, still, he's quite important. Rahotep and Nofret. Speaking about mustaches, by the way, the guy has a Clark Gable sort of mustache, very also, it was in vogue during that time. I have to tell you, the Egyptians were very racist in some ways. It was a superpower, no kidding, and a lot of the writings, they indicate that they used to make fun of other societies and people who live, like, for example, in the desert, not all of the desert dwellers, but some of them, and some of the Libyans, that they were unclean, whereas the Egyptians, they had this huge culture of cleanliness and being clean shaven and using different types of perfumes, okay, essential oils and perfumes and well, we have aromatherapy as well, of course, but basically it was a big thing for the Egyptians. Ehab, sorry, it's still it's not correlating. It's I moved on and it's still refusing to move on. Is there something I can do from here so I don't? Okay. Well, this was before the shutdown. It just starts to not go with it. Well, is there old technology like an actual cable instead of the wireless? With the old technology, if it's the cable, it'll just follow, obviously. Just follow it here. Yeah, to go back to marriage and divorce. Okay. Right. We have something called the Maxims, or basically it's wisdom literature written by the vizier Ptah-Hotep. Okay, and it's during Dynasty 5, during the reign of the Egyptian king Isesi. He was the king before last of the 5th dynasty. And in the Maxims of Ptah-Hotep, he says some very interesting things. One of them is that as soon as you are able to establish a household, okay, and this is one of the names for marriage in ancient Egypt, okay. Gerek Per, establish a house. Remember, Per was a house, basically, okay. And another expression used also to Irit F. Hamet, make for yourself a wife. It's take for yourself a wife. It's basically, it's make actually for yourself a wife. Okay? And as I said, from an early time, they also encouraged young men. He did not specify an age, that he says, whenever you are able to establish a house. So they recommend that. Okay? There are no particular scenes of a wedding banquet, for example. Okay? So we don't have anything to indicate that. At the same time, we have established religious centers like temples, and we have priests and priestesses. And yet we don't have evidence that it had to be sort of, you know, a religious thing or presided upon by a religious figure. Incidentally, in Islam, it's the same. In Islam, we have one of the administrators of our faculty. When he retired, he became a ma'zoon, okay, and would perform marriages. He's really enjoying it, by the way. I mean, he sees wonderful things, and he's thinking of writing, you know, writing a book with all those weird stories that he keeps seeing, okay? So he doesn't have to be, this guy graduated from the Faculty of Commerce, like he doesn't have to be a Sheikh of Al-Azhar or anything in order to be a ma'zoon. And the whole idea, I guess, of it is to announce to the people that these people are now living together, okay? Right, but something very ancient that we have, we have lots of musicians of both sexes, in fact. That was definitely not that. I'll go over this and get into marriage here. Okay, the important thing هنا قايمة العفش. It's very ancient. we have actual written evidence, okay? But it's very interesting to note that, yes, the female did indicate every single thing that she got into the marriage. And that's important. Why? Because in divorce, first of all, she will take 1/3 of the man's property. Okay? It's quite a lot. 1/3. 1/3 is for the wife in the case of divorce. Okay? And in case of, if she's widowed, by the way, she takes more. She takes 2/3, and then the children and the rest of his family can take from the 1/3. That's also a lot. 2/3 is quite a lot. And also in the case of divorce, she takes everything. With a حصل تبديد, the husband cannot get rid of her stuff. She comes into the marriage with it, she lives with it. Okay, so this is quite important. And it tells us something about the rights of females. Okay? Remember, for those of you who saw Sense and Sensibility, for example, I mean, the father died, and then the male cousin inherited his own wife, and daughters were left penniless, basically. So even in the 1800s in England, the females had much less in case of, you know, rights and what they could have. Okay. The man was expected to love his wife. Okay, and in the maxims of Ptah Hotib, it says, love your wife, feed her, clothe her back, anoint her body, for she is a fertile land for her husband. That's just part of it. Okay. We have here a marriage contract in Demotic, okay, and as we said, Iria Mhamet or Irit Mhamet is to make for yourself a wife. A husband was called a thigh, okay, and incidentally, Si, you know what Si means? Si Sayyid? Si means man. Remma kaman means man. I swear, it's Remes, Remma, Remma is man also. Okay? And the Gitta, by the way, for the body, it's the same word as well. Just so you know. We should have a lecture of the number of words and swear words that we have in Egyptian, or in colloquial Arabic, I should say, that are all طبعا from the Egyptian language, have nothing to do with Arabic. We have entire, actually, sentences, an entire sentence like اديني شوية فول. ولا كلمة عربي in this entire sentence. Not one single Arabic word is in this entire sentence. Or التخيير, yeah. In Arabic it's إما وإما, and it's no. This yeah is actually, it's quite ancient. To see, by the way, is ma'a, two A's. Ma'a. Okay, anyway. So, sorry, again, it's not moving, but okay. But moving on to divorce. Sadly, we do not have any evidence at all, not one single piece of evidence that I know of so far, of child custody in cases of divorce, because that's quite important to know. I mean, who basically gets it? Right now, there's a very bad situation actually in Egypt. And a lot of times, the mother of the husband will get more rights than the mother, for example, in a case of divorce. Unfortunately, I cannot sort of compare, because honestly, we know nothing they don't even mention what happens in custody cases for the children. And it's not like the children weren't important. Obviously, they were hugely important for them. A lot of cases, they always show their children with them. Ramses II, by the way, he had over 100 children, males and females, but he was very also fond of his sons. He always showed them in procession. They would take up almost an entire temple, of course, there's so many of them. And he always had them in order of age. You know, the oldest right in the front and going back to the smaller ones right in the back. It's very cute, actually, to see. Yes, he was very, very obviously very happy and proud of them. And also, in the case of Ramses II, he insisted that his sons would be buried in the Valley of the Kings, which traditionally, from the New Kingdom, was only used for kings. The exceptions are known. One of them was Hatshepsut insisted that Senenmut, be buried also in the Valley of the Kings, but his tomb has never been discovered so far. But there is evidence that she insisted that she wanted to be buried there, and he will have, have a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, which is quite unusual. Hatshepsut, by the way, had a tomb in the Valley of the Queens and the Kings after she became monarch. Yes.
So you said Ramses has 100 kids?
No, over 100.
Over 100?
طبعا, not from the same wife, obviously. Yes, actually in the US they have a condom named after him. I don't know if you know that, but it's one of the very famous ones.
They were allowed to marry?
Yes, they were allowed to marry more than one. Most of them only had one. Okay, most of the not the pharaohs, but most of the regular people had one wife.
One of the wives is queen, and the rest is...
No, okay, that's good that you mention it. In the case of pharaohs, at any one time he can have only one Hemet Nisut Weret, which is the grand or great royal wife. Okay? For a time, in the case of Ramses II, for a time it was Nefertari. She died, and then Merit Amun became that. And then he also had Iset Nofret, and then her daughter as great royal wives. Okay? But there can only be one of those at a time, and usually when it comes time for the succession to the throne, obviously they give preference to the sons of them, okay? And then you have secondary wives. The secondary wives, they also have the title of Hemet Nisu, not Weret. Weret is great, the great. But she is Hamet Nesu, obviously. And this is in the case of the foreign princesses, for example. She would also be wife of the king, or wife of the man, and other men as well. And then you would have the concubines. He does have a number of concubines as well. And we have many, many cases and of great pharaohs where children of concubines became pharaohs, including Thutmose III, Thutmose الثالث, he's very well known. They call him the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. It should be the other way around. He came before Napoleon. Also because he insisted on taking scientists and artists with him, and they depicted the flora and fauna of all the countries that they visited. We have the first example, by the way, of a rooster, husband of the chicken. It was something unusual at the time, and that's the 18th dynasty. The first time that he saw it when he went to Asia. So obviously we didn't have chicken here. We had geese. Egyptian geese are very old. And we had ducks, including traveling ducks, and we had quails. The daughter of Akhenaten is shown eating a quail. Okay, but we did not have chicken. Pomegranates, Ramon. It's shown. So he used to also paint and depict the weird things that we don't have that he saw in all of these foreign countries. Also his son Amenhotep II, not from a royal marriage. Okay. So Ramses, yes, he has, they're very well attested. I'm just forgetting the exact number now. I think it's 60-something daughters, and the males are more, and he has them all by name. And he insisted on having the sons buried in the Valley of the Kings. It's right also at the beginning of the valley. When you go right into the entrance, it's on your left-hand side. Okay, it's KV5, and it has over 200 rooms. It's one of the largest tombs in the entire Valley of the Kings. It's not open for visitation. They still are excavating it, so maybe that's why. Okay, this is a case of the will of Naunacht. Okay, the interesting thing about this will is the following. Okay, this woman was first married to a man, and then she got, she remarried after that, and had 8 children, and then she was ill, and 3 of the 8 children were nasty. They did not help her, and so she insisted on going to court. Okay, and she took the children and the husband, and they all had to take an oath in front of the court of law that after her death they would not contest her will, because in her will she refused to give anything to the 3 children and to the husband. But she stipulated in her will that this does not prevent, if the father wants to give those 3 disinherited ones from his own money, he can do it if he wants. But she refused to give them a penny or anything, basically they got nothing from her. And also one of them, and also this son that she loved the most, that she gave something extra to, was named after her first husband. So, I mean, that's pretty, it tells you something, right? Tells you something. And he's not his son. She didn't have children by him. He's the son of the other man that she married. So he obviously knows that that was, her first husband. It's all attested in writing, okay? So I think it says quite a lot. I mean, basically this will alone, if she's strong enough, she can take her husband and all of the children and have them take the oath to not try to contest the will, okay? Incidentally, all of the contracts had to have witnesses. In our marriage contracts in Islam, بنسمع عن 2 شهود. أنا من الأفلام والله يعني 2 شهود, 2 witnesses. They had 4 witnesses. for the marriage, and actually 16 for the divorce. That's quite a number. 16, that's a lot. That's 4 fours. Yeah, it is a lot. So basically, judging here from what we saw, to be able to own your own property, to be able to have your own job. We have also female scribes, not too many of them, but we have, I think 2 are very well attested, and maybe a 3rd one. Also literacy, there's something that I wanted to mention. Everyone thought for a very long time that the females got way less education than the males, okay? I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's possible to think of that. However, we discovered quite a number of things that made us change this drastically. For example, in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, these were the workers who worked on the pharaoh's tombs and also the noble tombs in all of the area of western Thebes. And all of these, a lot of the households had servants. They did not want the workmen going and mingling with the people and maybe getting drunk and blabbering about things and secrets in bars. Okay, so they got them servants. So we have, for example, an example of a very, very nice letter from one servant lady to another. Okay, she's gossiping a little about her household, that's one. And she was also asking to borrow a nice shawl and a nice necklace that she had because she had to attend their wedding and she wanted to borrow them. And these are 2 maids writing to each other. Okay, so obviously we have some literacy here on the level of maids in the 18th dynasty. That's something weird, okay? And it went to the 20th, it's just kind of strange. Also, we have one of the letters is, let me see if, thanks. One of the letters, okay, also, is from a peasant, or, well, not a peasant, a landowner, هنقول من الأعيان, but still, he works on the land and all of his family are working on the land. And in that letter, he's writing to his oldest son, and he's telling him, I recognize that you were not being nice to my second wife. Ask her to write to me in her own handwriting so I make sure that you haven't done anything to her. Okay. He also had a spoiled son and he gave instructions to take care of him and do everything that he wants, the spoiled brat, the little one. And he was very, very harsh with the oldest son he's giving him these instructions and telling him, you know, you good for nothing, you do this, you that. It's so funny. But the thing is, still, these people are not living in the residence, in the capital city. They are living in the countryside. And she is this guy's second wife. And for him to say something like that would indicate still that women had quite a lot more education than is normally thought. Plus, in the priestly positions, I told you we have quite a number of priestesses here. One of the very important priestly positions was something called the God's wife of Ammon. The God's wife of Ammon, the very first known one, was Ahmose Nefertari. Okay? She was the wife of Ahmose, who expelled the Hyksos. And Hatshepsut carried the same title. And basically, most of the royal women starting from the 18th dynasty, they held that title. But around dynasties 25 and 26, it started to take on a different sort of position all entirely. She became more of a sacred virgin. She couldn't marry a human. But she also became sort of the representative of the king in the south. So it started from about the area of Gabalain in Middle Egypt, started from Middle Egypt way down to the south to Nubia. There used to be a position called the king's son, okay, for basically for Nubia, okay, and also the land of Kush. And they abolished that position. But he wasn't the king's actual son. He wasn't his son. Even the first one of them was not a direct king's son. He was obviously unrelated to the king, but he held that position. Okay? He just held that position. After that, we start having this God's wife of Ammon being a representative or sort of another king in the south. For example, in scenes where the king is supposed to be offering to Amun, she would be offering instead. Okay, in scenes of the king doing certain ceremonies or opening up canals or doing whatever, she would be shown instead of the king in the entire south of Egypt. That's a very, very important position. That's why she had to be a king's sister, king's daughter, that sort of thing. Okay? Anyway, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, because we just, basically we just gave very, very general examples. Thank you very much.